Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Clear Roads webinar for the presentation of the final results of a project that looked at understanding the true costs of winter maintenance. We are pleased to have project researcher Andrew Cadmus from Parsons Brinckerhoff join us to present the findings of the study. Andrew?
Thank you, Colleen. And thank you all for joining us today. We also have David Rose from Parsons Brinckerhoff on the call, who is also part of the team. This research project is an effort of the Clear Roads and was initiated to identify ways to better manage winter maintenance costs through three goals. Having more data-driven management. In this context, we really mean understanding the link between level of effort and results. And more significantly, this means understanding the cost of achieving a specific level of service. Number two is improving efficiency and effectiveness of winter maintenance. Here we're really interested in measuring the effectiveness of different winter maintenance policies and being able to compare them to make better decisions. And finally, to better understand and communicate costs of winter maintenance. We know that providing critical information to policymakers quickly after a storm and in a format that they understand is, in order to make decisions, is very important. So to achieve these goals, the research team evaluated the available data from several states to develop a strategy for identifying the cost of work performed during a storm event. The strategy was really to link the work performed, the effort and cost, to the level of service achieved during a storm event. We identified these as kind of the holy grail in decision making. We wanted to be able to say that on average, 1 lane mile of level of service A on I-95 in a particular region or a particular state would cost a certain amount of money, and that a level of service B would be, $1,000 cheaper per lane mile or something like that. And with this level of data, we'd then be able to begin comparing costs and efforts across regions, across states, comparing different winter maintenance methods and policies, and more easily communicate the true cost of winter maintenance. So we began the analysis by doing, sorting through the data that was available across many states. During this analysis of the data available, we discovered some gaps that included two main underlying themes. That there was really no link that we could make between the level of service and the lane mile costs. And this is because of a link that we were unable to find in historical data. And there's no link between the assumptions regarding the number and intensity of storms to cost. And we'll talk a little bit more about these in a couple minutes. We also noted that most states use separate financial and maintenance management systems that track costs and work performed a bit differently, resulting in these gaps. As a result, the research team took an opportunity to take a step back and evaluate the data collection effort of state DOTs and recommend some improvements. So we analyzed many states' data, but Maine had the most comprehensive set and participated significantly in the research. So we used theirs as kind of a sample. And you can see here, this is how the data was roughly organized. And I'm sure many of you do it in roughly the same way. And obviously, this is probably an oversimplification of what is done. But it was organized basically in tables, in five tables. For example, the maintenance area table would include information like crew name, lane miles of level of service, roadway functional class, etc. Storm data was also collected in a separate table with unique storm IDs and other information about the precipitation, etc. And then the three major cost categories, material, labor, and equipment, all had separate tables. The great thing about mains data was that each of the major cost categories associated the costs with a storm ID and crew ID. And that really helped us allocate costs from a particular storm to costs to a particular storm and to a particular region, and even crew in the state. Obviously, because every state collects data for their specific needs, everyone is a bit different. After reviewing mains data in several other states, we noticed some common themes in how data could better be collected and stored to further the goals of this research study and other decision making. And some of you may do these things already. Maine does some of these things, but we thought we would combine all of this into a list of recommendations and general policy. So with that, what were some of the lessons learned? We feel that allocating costs appropriately is critical. This can be done by using unique storm identification numbers, assigning unique crew and or region identification numbers, and being able to link the costs to those, as we just discussed. We also felt that it was really important to document the number of lane miles in the crew areas by level of service desired. So one area may have 15 lane miles of LOSA, and et cetera. We think recording unit costs for quantities of labor, equipment, and materials is important. Recording past lane miles accomplished during a storm event by level of service is one of the most critical pieces. And this is kind of the first data limitation that we found. We couldn't find any data that actually did this. And just to make sure we're all talking on the same, talking in the same terms, the past lane mile is you're maintaining one lane mile, say, for a storm, but you go over it 5 times. That's our 5 past lane miles. I think all of you know that, but just want to make sure we're all talking in the same terms. And then record the storm characteristics uniformly. And that was a significant barrier in a lot of the data that we looked at. And then finally, data integrity and usability. To be able to use a relational database, much like Maine does in those 5 tables, that they're all able to be linked through those unique storm IDs or unique crew IDs. To reduce the number of unstructured fields would also be a big benefit. I know that a lot of times we want to give the crews in the fields the ability to enter whatever information that they think is relevant in maybe a specific box. But it becomes very, very difficult to analyze that data. So for example, in one set of data we looked at, crews would have their own convention, and in this one box they would put the air temperature / pavement temperature, and then they'd put you know, basically the roadway condition, you know, in so many words. And if everybody thinks that that's important, maybe that should be, we feel like that should be a separate field that's captured just for air temperature or just for pavement temperature, instead of it being combined in a field. And that goes to, and I think it's important to still have some unstructured fields. It's important to have that flexibility, but as much as possible to structure them. And then finally, not to concatenate fields or to put multiple pieces of data in one field, just like the example where I said pavement temperature and air temperature. It's better to put that in 2 different boxes. So this might be a little bit difficult for you to see on your screen, but this is a checklist of what data we felt was most critical to collect. This checklist is also available in the report that we've provided, and hopefully Colleen has or will send that out to everybody. But these are kind of the most critical items to reach the objectives in our research study and to kind of further that analysis. Of course, it's important to note that I know a lot of states charge against certain items in different ways. Equipment, for example, can be charged by the day, hour, mile, or some combination thereof. And so this isn't going to be a perfect worldview of the different characteristics, but each of the variables are here, and I think that each state can understand the intent. But obviously, any recommendations for additional fields is welcome. So I talked a little bit about relational database, and this is kind of illustrating that fact. So after identifying what data to collect in the last slide, storing the data in a way that can easily be analyzed and used is the next challenge. Most states do store their data in a relational database, but some lack the critical links needed for the full analysis. It's important that each cost in each category be associated with a storm, region, and crew. Further, it's important that these costs be associated with lane miles by level of service category. So in this really simplified example, the database is made up of 5 tables: a table for storm data, roadway characteristics, materials, equipment, and labor. You can see the red lines indicating what items use the foreign key. It's a database term for identifying the critical piece of information that can link the data among all tables. And then you can see the orange line, which is connecting the roadway characteristics back to everything else through the storm data table. This is obviously just one way to set things up. Obviously, there's many others. So with that, we just walked through kind of the original goals of the study and the data analysis that we performed in pursuit of those objectives. And we walked through kind of the lessons learned from the data gaps we identified and made some recommendations about what data to collect and how to store that data. Because of really those 2 particular data limitations that we identified, the team decided to develop a tool that would achieve the goals with future data. So because historical data didn't have those links necessarily that we needed to perform the analysis to achieve the objectives, we built a tool so that we could begin collecting the data to perform the analysis. And I think the tool evolved to do much more than we originally set out to accomplish. But so really, the 9 objectives here are the new objectives for that tool. We wanted it to be able to perform what-if scenario testing on unit costs. So if labor rates for a certain labor category go up, how does that really affect the cost of a storm? We wanted the tool to be able to communicate cost drivers to policymakers and the public, to allow managers to better understand and manage costs, to compare winter maintenance costs across storms, regions, and states, facilitate evaluation of the cost effectiveness of winter maintenance policies, compare contracted versus state maintenance, compare winter maintenance costs over time, directly link assumptions regarding the number and intensity of storms to cost, and directly link levels of service to lane mile cost. Now, we'll walk through these objectives and how the tool meets some of them. Some of them are partially met because we don't have enough historical data yet, but the tool will be able to facilitate these objectives. So the True Cost tool, which we will walk through, allows users to input data. It collects data needed for analysis, stores the data to facilitate data analysis, and it supports the estimation of storm costs. It incorporates additional tools to analyze the data to achieve some of the objectives we talked about, and in particular, average cost per lane mile, and comparison across time or periods, and storm event comparison. So this is a graphic kind of representation of what the tool looks like. And we basically have two main modes, and those are the two big boxes at the top, estimate mode and data entry mode. They are identical. The only difference is that after you've input data in the estimate mode and you save the data, it saves it into the database for estimates, the red box on the left. When you enter data in the data entry mode, it saves it in the database for actual data on the right. And it's important that we felt that it was important to keep those that data separate. Each of the modes have an input section and then an output cost summary, which achieves that objective of communicating effectively. And then we have the analysis tools at the bottom. And there's the period comparison, which is a comparison over time. It compares the cost summary, cost per mile, and cost breakdown. And then we have the storm comparison, which can compare particular storm events. The nice thing about these analysis tools is that they can pull data from either the database for estimates or the database for actuals. And that's really valuable because you might want to test some assumptions, like we said before, doing some what-if scenario testing. So I'll go through this section quickly so we can get to the tool, but we wanted to show how the tool meets these objectives. Estimate mode allows you to perform some what-if scenario testing, communicate cost drivers to policymakers through the output, and allows managers to better understand and manage costs. The data entry mode helps to communicate cost drivers to policymakers again, allow the managers to better understand maintenance costs, and as an added feature, to collect and store data needed for future analysis. This wasn't one of the original objectives, but we thought through it and realized that this is beneficial for the program overall. And then the storm comparison tool. Now this will help you compare maintenance costs across storms, district, regions, states, and it somewhat facilitates the evaluation of and cost of winter maintenance policies. And I say somewhat because there's nowhere that we input a particular policy. There's nowhere that but if you know that one region, if you can compare two regions, and if you know one region uses a different combination of salt and sand than another, you may be able to draw some conclusions about the cost differences between them. But we feel like that's after there's more historical data collected with this tool, I think that could be something that we could do a bit stronger. It also allows for the performance of what-if scenario testing, communicate cost drivers, and allows managers to better understand and manage costs. Similarly, the period comparison tool does many of the same things that the other does. And in the first item here is compare contracted versus state maintenance. And that is, well, we could talk a bit more about that when we get to the tool. So here are the overall results. 1 through 4 accomplished. We talked about the facilitation of cost effectiveness of winter maintenance policies. We feel like that's partially met because the tool doesn't actually do it itself. It needs somebody to look at the data and apply some thought to it. But those 2 bottom ones directly link the assumptions regarding the number and intensity of storm to cost and directly link levels of service to lane mile cost. Those are the 2 that really require historical data to be collected that links those things. And once that occurs, this tool can provide that information. So now I'd like to walk through the winter maintenance tool. I guess I'd like to pause for a minute and see if there's any questions regarding the objectives or the objectives of the study and how we've gotten to this point at this point. Hearing and seeing no questions, I'll go ahead and move on to the tool. All right. So this is the first screen of the winter maintenance tool. And you can see it's again broken down into basically those 4 boxes that we illustrated before. Estimate mode, data entry mode, storm comparison, and period comparison. So I'm going to go ahead and click on estimate mode. This is pre-populated with some sample data, and that's just so that we can show you how this is set up. What we would normally input is the estimate number. It's just a unique number for this particular estimate so that you can track it once it's saved into the database. A checkbox to see whether you want to, whether this estimate in particular is for work performed by a private contractor or not. And the model does not use this in order to calculate costs because we don't have enough historical data on which to do that. But by checking this, it saves it into the database, in particular on the actual side, so that that analysis can be done in the future. Everybody has different names for sub-areas or sub-regions. In particular, this might be District 5, for example, and this may be crew, 2. And that's, or this, I'm sorry, this could be district, and this could be crew. And then the name of the district and crew would be input here. We'd like to track whether it is urban or rural. Again, this is not used in the estimating, but we want to track that for future analysis. And I see a question: is this the most recent version of Excel? It is, and it will work with all versions. If anybody has any compatibility issues, we can always save it as a earlier version of Excel, but I don't anticipate any problems with that. We haven't used any really unique features to the new version of Excel. Enter the storm date. This is the area lane miles, and we put over here kind of an illustration of what we mean by area lane miles, service lane miles, and pass lane miles, just to make sure everybody's using the same terms. Enter that information here, and this is where I think a lot of states have a little bit more trouble. We'd really like to track pass lane miles by LOS, and this can provide us really valuable data in analyzing costs and allocating costs to particular levels of service. Like I said before, I think that's the holy grail in really understanding winter maintenance costs. So the yellow boxes are all inputs. All the white boxes are, they're usually hard-coded unless, as before, you saw that this is a write-in box. And it'll be labeled as such when you get the model. But everything else, if you try to edit it, it says that you basically can't. And that's really just to maintain the integrity of the model. We have down here storm duration, precipitation, and storm type. And we've put a list of values in here. I know that everybody kind of classifies these things as with different categories. And that's one customization that I think would be valuable. But we want all states that would be using this tool to be using the same values in that drop-down list. And the reason for that is that because we think that those will be tied directly to cost. And if we want to compare across states, consistency in data would be critical. So now I'm going to go ahead and click Materials button to move on to Materials. And here we have two materials already input, sand and salt, pretty common. There's opportunities to do write-ins, and maybe you have a particular brine solution that you want to use, and you got to check the box to say, yeah, I'm going to use that in this particular estimate. You can type in whatever unit costs you want to put in. This is the chemical brine measured in gallons. Input the quantity needed, say 100 gallons. And then you have the option of using unit cost ranges or to write in a particular cost. And we did this because this one is in estimate mode. We may not know the particular cost. Maybe we want to forecast what a storm might cost later this winter. So we allow you to enter ranges, or you can just go ahead and say, this is $15, this is going to be $75, and it's going to be $20. So it's pretty flexible in that there's a number of write-in options here. I'd be curious to hear if people think that that's enough. Core team thought so. But you can see as I enter things are updated, and the total material cost ends up there. Very so moving on to the equipment, very, very similar, whether you're going to use it or not, number of units, days, and in this particular case, we structured this for days or hours. You can, if your state only does hourly rates, you can uncheck this box, and only hourly rates are calculated. We received some feedback recently that charging by the mile was also important, and we can look into adding that into this model if the ClearRoads team desires to do so. We go to labor, and here we have a very similar structure to the others. Check it if you want to use it or not. The intent is to simplify things is for people to enter the burdened labor costs. And I think that generally simplifies, and we put a definition down here, which burdened labor includes overhead associated with the labor. Any state can rewrite this definition. As long as you're consistent, that's what's important. And then overtime. And you can put in whatever labor rates you want, number of hours, number of people in that position, or you can use ranges if you desire, and we have drop downs for those ranges as well. So I see a couple of questions over on the right. For storm type and precipitation in inches, what are selections for ice and freezing rain? That's a good question. That's something that we should standardize. Let me go back and take a look at that. So I think that it'd probably be best to do rain equivalent inches. That's something that we would like to get feedback on and to talk about. Next question, and that would just be for consistency if possible. Next question, and that goes across snow, ice, etc. Next question or what about multiple weather types in one storm? We set this up to really, this is for a particular crew. So in the region that one crew is maintaining, we would expect there be not as much variation, but we would ask that you pick the most prominent or storm type during that storm event, and that's a simplification that I think we need to do in order to analyze the data. And with enough data, I think that will normalize. And then the last question that I see at the moment: can you change cubic yards to ton if you track in that unit cost? Let's go back over to materials. And yes, I mean, so for sand, we have hard-coded that as cubic yards. I think an easy way around that is to add sand as another material down here, or you could say sand tons, and go ahead and add the quantities needed. If that's something that we'd like to modify into a drop-down up there, that's definitely something that we could do. But that would be the workaround at the moment. And follow-up question: you say liquid equivalent should be used for all precipitation types. I think so. And that's something that we can discuss, and we can add another one if you think that. I recognize that snow might be more valuable as especially if it's wet or dry as inches, but of snow. But I think for the time being, I think liquid equivalent would probably be the most consistent way to track the data. So we went ahead and did labor, and we did equipment and materials, and let's jump to the total cost summary. So for this storm event, this is the data that is summarized and presented for you. We have the estimate number. This was the district or crew. I changed it back to write-in on the first page, but you can see that updates this page live. So anything you put on that assumptions page for those two boxes will be updated here. You have the crew number, the storm date, storm duration, which I think is really important, precipitation in inches, and storm type. We also have summaries of the cost in maintenance, lane miles, or crew maintenance area lane miles. That's the number of lane miles that were input on that first page. And the cost per area lane mile. So this takes basically the total cost of the storm and divides it by the crew maintenance area lane miles. Same thing for lane miles serviced and past lane miles. So that kind of gives you your bottom line costs. Really easy way to communicate the cost experience from the most recent storm. And then we have a number of lane miles for each of these levels of service, and then we have maintenance equipment, labor, and then the total. We have a notes box in here. If there's anything that may have adversely impacted costs or something that you want to know, this is an open field where you can input basically whatever you want that communicates with that cost. And then we have the pie chart to just illustrate how things have been broken down. I modified the labor cost and added something fairly expensive, so this jumped up a bit. So this was the estimate mode. You can see up here that it's in estimate mode. You can click Save Data, and it will save into the estimate database for retrieval later. Or you could print the entire estimate. And what that does is it prints each of the screens that we walked through and prints the cost summary total for printing a report to share with managers or crew. So I'm going to exit this mode for a second and jump to storm comparison. And I'm going to expand the screen a little bit, and hopefully it doesn't shrink too much on your screen. But this screen allows you to compare 4 storms side by side. And you do that by first clicking here. You can pick whether you want to pull data from the estimate database or the data entry database. And once you pick that, it updates the list of storms that are saved within this database, and you can pick a storm. Everything gets updated automatically. You can see and it's color coded. So this is the blue storm here. It's the first blue storm here. The notes is pulled into the blue box here, and there's a summary of cost per crew maintenance area lane mile. And I guess it's up for debate which lane mile metric you think is most important, whether it's past lane mile or service lane mile. We picked this for the moment, but it compares the storms. The actual storm in red was quite a bit more expensive than the storm in blue. You can try to understand why that was. The red storm was shorter, had the same amount of precipitation, but it was in a different region. You can compare the lane miles that you see between the two. Maybe this region requires a chemical brine because it's in a colder section of the state, for example. And you can see the costs. So this is all fictional data at the moment, but I think it's the way to compare storms against each other. And hopefully in the future, if enough states track their data in this tool, you can compare. We can merge the databases, and you can compare storms across different states. And that's where the period comparison tool really comes, is a bit more appropriate probably. So you can compare all of 2014, all months or just a particular month, and maybe you only want state crews and not private contractors. There was no storms in that case. I picked June. State crews. And it's a great way to summarize your data. Here's the number of storms that occurred in FY14, the duration, the average duration in hours, average precipitation in inches, and the total costs during that period. Maybe you want to compare that to all the private contractors during the same period. So you make these the same, except you check this box instead, and there's your storm comparison. So there's I think a lot of ways to use this tool. Again, they summarize it in per lane mile cost and total cost by period across those different whatever you want to compare. So I think it'd be really fascinating to have all of Maine's data in this column and all of Massachusetts data in this column, and maybe just pick state crews or something and compare in that way. We have quite a number of questions, so let me see if I can get to some of these. Does the information need to be entered by hand for each storm, or can we pull directly from a database? At this point, it all needs to be entered by hand. We're kind of expecting this tool to be used maybe from this point going forward. Again, the main challenge has been that the data isn't necessarily, all the data requested by the tool isn't necessarily available in a database or in a way that we can extract it easily. As part of next step, well, I'd like to talk about that a bit more once we get to next steps, if you'll allow me to. And then next question, is this calculation tool for district or shop? I think multiple weather types should be an option. We may cover varying terrain from the same shop, and multiple weather types may be encountered, areas in the valleys and hills. I think that's a really good point, and we'll definitely add that to the notes and talk to the team about how they want to handle that. How are differences in operations LOS-A to LOS-C handled? Different materials, application rates, etc. This tool doesn't get down to that level of detail. What we would expect to do in next steps is, once the data is collected for lane miles, past lane miles in each of the LOS categories, that we would be able to run an analysis to assign costs for each of those LOS categories. So this is not really a bottom-up tool in terms of saying, okay, there's going to be a storm event covering 20 miles, and I expect to apply these principles or these policies. The tool really requires you to say, I'm going to use 3 tons of salt in the next storm, or I used 3 tons of salt in the storm that I just experienced. Next question. What is the difference between estimate and data entry? Really, the only difference is that when you click Save, it goes into a different database. And we did that because we really wanted we wanted you to be really confident in what you're doing. If you're doing an estimate, you should be in the estimate mode. You should not be saving that to the actual database. And we didn't want you to be able to make that mistake, because putting actual data into the actual database is so critical. We wouldn't want estimates to accidentally go in there for future analysis purposes. I may have missed this earlier. How are the levels of service defined? LOS A, B, C. That is a good question. Every state has a different definition for those. What we would hope is that in using this tool, you would use LOS as defined by by NCHRP. There was a winter maintenance study that was done that defined levels of service, and I understand that that may need a translation between your definition and theirs, but for the most part, in the states that we looked at, it was pretty clear which LOS categories in each of those states would match up with the LOS categories from that NCHRP study. And you bringing up that question brings a really good point. We probably should include that in the appendix of the report, the table that defines those level service categories. So I'll make a note of that. Okay. Let me see. Is there any other questions? No other questions at the moment. Hopefully I've answered those with everybody's satisfaction. And I will, that's basically the tool in a nutshell. Again, you can print the period comparison. You can jump back to the table cover sheet. I think that we've tried to make this as easy to use as possible. There's a table of contents that you can click on if you get lost at any point. It always tells you what mode you're in at the top. And you can switch back to data entry. You can see data entry mode is exactly the same as the previous. So with that, I'm going to jump back over to the presentation. So we just demonstrated the TrueCost tool. And now we're talking about next steps. Next steps, well, these are kind of the steps that we identified when we revised the scope, when we encountered some of those data limitations. But we developed the estimation tool. We developed the data collection tool, which is part of the TrueCost tool, and we really think that these are the next steps to develop a data collection methodology. A lot of the questions that you all have been asking is really related to how does data get collected and how does it get entered, and we've tried to do our best in defining those, and I've learned from some of the questions that we can improve that a bit, and we'll definitely do that. But identifying data collection methodology so that we're ensuring that consistent data is being put into the tool and being collected. Really, to roll this out to multiple states and make it flexible and compatible with each other, we really would like to convert this from an Excel-based tool, which is really local, to a web-based tool where the data is stored in the cloud, and so that right now, the way it would need to work is that you would send a copy of this Excel-based tool to multiple crews, and then each enter their own data, and then for it to be consolidated, or for your crews to send data to one person or one team who is responsible for maintaining one copy of the Excel tool. And I think that either way There's data that's lost in translation. It could make a lot of work for one person, and it could limit, really what comparisons that you can make. So a web-based tool could be that anybody, one designated person or two designated people from each crew or each maintenance district would be able to log in, enter the data for the most recent storm, and move on. And then one manager could pull all of that data and say, hey, based on all the input from all of our crews, within an hour of the close of a storm, you could have the estimated cost of that storm and the cost per lane mile, which I just think is really valuable. So that web-based tool could make that quite a bit easier. I think that some of the next steps are supporting the data collection by the states as questions come up, if enhancements are needed, that we be involved with that and assist with that data collection. And then really, after a season of winter maintenance, data has been collected to consolidate the data from across states or within states, and perform a really detailed level analysis and be able to answer those questions. How much did 1 lane mile of LOSA cost us last season? If our budget's cut next year, you could use that data to say, hey, if you cut my budget by $3 million, I'm going to have to move this many lane miles from LOSA to LOSB in order to keep up with things. That kind of analysis can be performed at that point, and then compare, to compare that aggregated data, across states, and really to start digging into the policies and finding out why one state costs a certain amount or another, to make the comparison between urban versus rural areas, or compare between the contracted versus state crews, by just pulling actual historical data and being able to draw those conclusions, and then present those results. So those are the things we identify as the next step. And I'll open it up to any other questions that have come up. I guess first with a couple of more questions from the chat. Where is the data stored? You mentioned the database, but I don't see it. It is stored within the tool, within the Excel spreadsheet. We didn't make that something that you could access directly, just because we were trying to tie that down a bit. But I'll switch over here and see if I can do that. So the way that the tool is set up is that basically when you click a button in normal Excel terms, it's switching to another tab. It's just that the other tabs are hidden. And we could unhide the database for estimate, for example. And there's 2 storms. So that's kind of where that's hidden. And how big a project would it be to do point 3 and point 4? Well, let me switch back and answer and see what those points were. Point 3 and point 4. We have developed a proposal to do that work, and that's something that we can share with you. We can send that over to you to show what that would take in terms of hours, etc. I've been talking for quite a while, so my throat's a little bit dry. Any other questions? Any other questions?
This is Scott Lucas here in Ohio. One thing I was kind of curious about then is that, for the future goal of this, would this live then once again on Clear Road's site? I mean, would that be kind of like the thought process in the future? I didn't know if anybody from the actual committee had any points on that.
I'll take that one. I mean, the tool itself, I'll certainly send out to everyone individually. In fact, I did last week. So you should all have a copy of the tool, and then we can also put it on the members-only portion of the website, unless, of course, you all decide that you'd like to make it publicly available, and then we'll put it in the public portion of the website. But we can post it there so that other people can easily access it.
I mean, quite honestly, I can see it actually lending itself a lot more to a smaller community to put in different storm data than, I mean, at the current state, putting all the information in by hand in the entire state of Ohio for every storm, I can't even fathom that right now.
There's definitely something to be said for, divide and conquer, having this available to different crews. One potential solution is, I don't know if your state has a file sharing or file management service, something like ProjectWise or Project Solve, where one file can live in kind of a managed program that is accessible through the web to multiple people, and people basically check it out, enter data, and check it back in. Might be another way to do that, but definitely recognize that as a concern. Couple more comments from the chat box. Clay mentioned that he's spent a fair amount of time entering data and found a couple of errors and fixes that he suggested and passed on. Definitely appreciate that feedback, and I believe that we can address many of those. So thank you very much for that feedback, and any other feedback that people have. I think that we welcome. I guess that's a question to the Clear Roads folks about what the next steps are from your perspective in closing out the project. But we can talk about that and finalizing these products.
Yeah, I'll step in on that as well. I think next steps, what I'd like to ask now that everyone has gotten a demonstration of the tool, and as I said, I sent out a copy of the tool last week, so you should all have it. I'd really like to see folks get in and play around with it, and if you have any additional feedback, let us know. As Clay mentioned, he did send me a few more items that he had caught this morning that I'll forward on to Andrew. But any other details or questions that you all have feedback on, we'd certainly like to get that. I'd like to set a deadline of about 2 weeks to finalize getting your feedback on both the tool and also the final report. So let's say, given the holidays, January 3rd, I'd like to have everybody's feedback in. Then Andrew can make any final changes that need to happen to the final report or the tool, and then I think we can close out the project. Does that sound all right?
Sounds good to me. And if you enter quite a bit of data while playing with the tool that you want to maintain for the final version of the tool that comes back, I'm happy to merge that in for you. So when we get the final version, we can do that. So your data entry at this point won't be a waste if you want to enter some actual data and start using the tool.
Hey, can you hear me now?
Yep,
hello?
Jay, we can hear you.
Okay, all right. This is Jay out of Washington. First, I just want to thank Andrew and David and all the people that put their effort on this. This was quite a daunting project when we first started, and we had huge aspirations and realized we had to pare it down. But I think you guys kind of hit the mark. And one of my ideas as we kind of went through the presentation if this thing continues to get developed, obviously there's some expense for the cloud and things like that. So if this thing turns out to what we think it's capable of being, maybe we have a log on and a password and some type of nominal fee to join and use the tool, because I think the more data that we get, the better it will be, and we can ferret out some of the things. And I think it's better than what I've ever seen before. So good job.
Thank you.
Andrew, I see we've got one more question from Clay Adams regarding pass lane miles. Do you want to address that?
Sure. Can you explain the importance of pass lane miles? Pass lane miles we see as the actual work being performed. If a storm rolls through and impacts, say, 10 lane miles of roadway, but it drops, but it's a very long storm and lasts a day and drops a quarter inch an hour. I mean, you're going to go out there so many times over that road, depending on how much salt you use, obviously. But the actual, so saying 10 lane miles and the duration of the storm is one way to do it, but we really think that the number of times that a truck goes over a particular lane is going to be a much, much better predictor and indicator of cost. So I think that it's really valuable. I think it's going to be really valuable for the future analysis. And in particular, saying pass lane miles per level of service. If we can track the number of lane miles of the level of service that's desired and that's achieved during a storm event, we've come a long way being able to really do some cool data analysis at that point.
Great. Well, thanks, Andrew. Are there any other additional questions?
This is Kyle Stallings. I like what I see. It's encouraging, and we are developing a new financial system here that I can see probably feeding right into this. At least I hope it would. So, nice job.
Thank you. And I want to emphasize, I think that as you all use this, if you choose to, and I hope you do, I'm sure that we're going to identify, improvements and suggestions, and we welcome those. We know that this is a complex subject, more than most people realize outside of this group, and we know that we're going to need to make some tweaks here and there, and so we definitely appreciate the feedback and your participation in it.
Yes, well said. And I also want to mention that as an additional follow-up beyond the review of the final report and the tool and getting this project closed out, it's probably, for those of you who are pretty excited about this tool and what it has to offer, it may be worth looking at those next steps that Andrew outlined and think about whether you want to propose an additional research project for 2014 funding to continue down the path with this project. That's certainly an option and might be a good candidate for a proposal if one of you is interested in that.
Colleen, this is Scott again. I was just curious on that, if when we go through this, if we do run into some snags in that as far as putting data into the system, is Clay available for kind of counsel on that, or should we contact someone else, or how does that really work for support?
If you want to send the questions to me, or any questions or details or comments to me, then I'll share them with Andrew. And if it seems like it makes sense for somebody to get directly in touch with Andrew and for you guys to have a conversation, we can certainly do that. But why don't you use me as the point of contact, and I'll kind of aggregate everything for Andrew.
Sounds great. Thank you.
All right. Well, I think if we don't have any other questions, then I just want to say thank you very much to the members of the subcommittee who worked on this project and had the vision for it and kept it going. And also thank you very much to Andrew and David from PB. They did a fantastic job. Very complicated project, and I felt like they did a really nice job working with us on this. So thank you very much to everyone who was involved.